nice place to start would be place, right? Because you have recently come back from, I believe, 6 weeks on a philosophical Silk Road, or the philosophical Silk Road.
Hmm.
And it struck me just at the end of the visualization Hamish was taking us through that, you know, it matters to be in the physical place. You traveled for it. You didn't, look at pictures online. So maybe you could tell us about what was that journey, and what did you experience?
What was the journey? Uh, so, the idea for it is we have a word theory, which means to explain. It's in propositions. And behind it is an older word, Theoria, which means to contemplate, to meditate. And we probably know something about that. That's mindfulness. But the oldest meaning of Theoria, and this is in the work of Nightingale and Ward, is actually pilgrimage. Pilgrimage. And the idea here is you're not changing people by putting them through this premise, this premise, this premise, this premise, because that doesn't really challenge their fundamental identity, the fundamental way they're framing themselves in reality. And what you do instead is you move to a different place, and they have to adjust and adapt, put on new glasses, if you will, and then you get them to look back to where they were, and you can see the limitations and the prejudices, and what was missed in that perspective. And you can judge if there's been an improvement, an increase in your ability to make sense and to connect. And then you can move again. And as you move again, you reflect back. And not only are you doing these one shot reflections, but the pilgrimage starts to take on a life of its own. It starts to disclose to you a through line that you can't possibly anticipate. Um, because places call us. They call to us. They demand that we reorient and reshape ourselves to them. They're not Newtonian space. They are inhabited with structure and meaning and purpose and function. Much of it can be foreign to us. And in learning that new way of being and seeing in the world, you can go through not an argument, but a passage. Think of the word passager, but think of a passage of text. Um, uh, you go through a passage, and it causes you to fundamentally change how you're seeing and being in the world. So I, I, I started by going to three conferences, one on Jung and Barfield and uh, Tomberg, the guy who wrote Meditations on the Tarot, and that was in Poznan, Poland. There's a theme running through all these. And then I went to Cambridge for a conference on theosis. Theosis is from the Neoplatonic tradition. It means becoming God, not by identity, but by profound participation. It is the Western civilization equivalent of enlightenment that you probably have not heard of. And part of what happens in a pilgrimage is also a profound recovery of what you're no longer seeing or what might have been lost to view. And what started to shape for me is theosis and its relation to theoria, both as contemplation and as pilgrimage, to theurgia as rituals of receptivity, and to theophany as the world becoming an icon of God. That started to take shape for me. Went to Zagreb and did some presentations on some practices for the International Conference in Philosophical Practice, and then started the journey proper. Each place was chosen because of a sage or a saint, and then each interlocutor was chosen because I knew I could spark with them. They could challenge me. So I'll just do quickly that, and then I'll stop. Went to Istanbul, and my interlocutor was Jonathan Pajot, talking about Maximus the Confessor, who is basically the Thomas Aquinas of Eastern Orthodoxy. And we were in the Hagia Sophia, we were in the Chora Church, we were sitting and talking we recorded like 8 hours of conversation. I already loved Jonathan as a deep friend. That deepened for both of us. Then went to Seville, Spain, and met up with Thomas Cheetham. And he was talking to me through Henri Corbin about Ibn al-Arabi and Sufism, Neoplatonism within Sufism, and saw the Alcazar, which was mind-blowing. Then went to Athens, and my beloved Sarah joined me there. And had two people there. Rafe Kelly was there, and we were talking about embodiment on pilgrimage. And we did some martial arts together and some push hands and talked about the interconnections between the academy and the shrine and the gymnasium, and that Plato means wrestler, big shoulders, and Socrates was a stonemason. And then the other interlocutor was Charles Stang about pseudo-Dionysus. And of course, there was the Acropolis and the Areopagus and the ancient Agora. Um, and then went to Rome and was with Bishop Maximus talking about Clement of Alexandria and the nature of faith, and went to one of the earliest churches. And then we went down into the depths like one of Jung's dreams. And underneath the church was a temple to Mithras, and it was numinous and challenging. The bishop, I told him how powerfully his presence had transformed me, and that he related the same to me, and said that caused him a bit of a bit of a problem. So how could such a non-Christian be so transformative for him? But he was, as always, he was saying that in good faith and good humor. Um, and then I went to Amsterdam, and the sage there was Spinoza, and my interlocutor was my son Jason. Um, and we filmed in front of the monument. We filmed in Spinoza's house, right in front of the very books that he used. Went upstairs into the loft. And in the guest book, the guide said, "Look right here." And there was Albert Einstein's signature. And some of you know I have done a course on Einstein and Spinoza's God. And that was a powerful moment. Um, and each person became sort of, I don't know what to call it. Like Jonathan was the artist. Tom became, the pilgrimage showed me this. Tom became the poet. Um, and, Istanbul was glorious and Seville was elegant. Charles was a scholar. Athens felt like home. It always feels that way to me. Bishop Maximus was the philosopher, and Rome felt eternal. And Amsterdam was liminal. It's being reclaimed from the ocean, but always swallowed back up by it. And Jason was the student. Um, so the places and the persona and the persons and the traditions were all very alive for me. And I went through what I described to you, that passage. I call it a meta-noetic, meaning not noetic is perspectival knowing, and meta means beyond. It's also the word in the New Testament used for conversion or transformation. So it's a meta-noetic passage rather than an argument or a theory in the propositional sense. Where I'm at now, well, we can talk about it. I mean, I'm not, it's still reverberating in me. It's maybe the most profoundest thing I've done, maybe perhaps besides having kids. Um, so there was some very powerful, for lack of a better word, mystical experiences, uh, insights, connections, um, fundamental changes in my thinking. I don't know where I am with respect um, to these religions, other than a deep recovery of the Neoplatonism that has put me into a sense of deep service to Christianity, to Islam, and to Judaism, and to the science that was taking shape around Spinoza. Sorry for a long answer. I can't give a short answer to that. It was just, it was a pilgrimage. I still feel called to it. I still feel responsible to it.
Beautiful. I didn't want a short answer, so I'm very grateful to hear, and also curious. I was wanting to know, and I think all of us were. So there's a what I feel moved in me in particular is that well, to frame it in within the boundaries of this course, like one of the primary ways that we have always made sense of reality is through an understanding of the sacred and an understanding of what is, let's say, um, downstream of what we're seeing. What's at the essence and the root. Now, over the last, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years in the West, there's been a rejection of there's been a lot going on, but part of it has been defined by a rejection of traditional forms, a rejection of the idea of truth itself in post-structuralism and post-modernity. And now what I'm feeling is this. Actually today just started writing a piece called "Welcome to Peak Fragmentation." This feeling of the fragmentation cannot go any further, and now there's a pull towards a unifying understanding of reality. Now, that can take many forms, and I think unfortunately often it takes very simplistic forms. Right-wing nationalism is one form, left-wing nationalism is another form. There's many different forms it could take. One form is people returning to Christianity in the West, for example. There's a kind of mini Christian revival going on. People we know like Jordan Hall have taken that route, which I understand and respect. It's not my path, certainly, but what I was really struck by was theosis, this idea of theosis that you mentioned, and this sense that there is perhaps a way to return to a profound connection to the sacred in the Western psyche or Western culture that we don't have much awareness of. So I wondered if you could speak on that and maybe perhaps on theosis in particular and kind of unpack it a little bit.
Yeah. So it's a reinterpretation of the central Christian claim. I'm going to be neutral about the metaphysics or epistemology around that. I'm just using it to try and lay out how it carries with it a reconfiguration of how Christianity is understood. We in the West have tended to understand Christianity forensically. There's something wrong with us. There's a disease that has to be cured, so we get our metaphysical fire insurance, and that's the basic idea. And of course, there's degrees of sophistication, but if you take a look in the church fathers, starting with Irenaeus and going through Clement and Dionysius and all these people I was bumping into, they keep playing with this theme of God becomes man so that man can become God, which is not something we understand very clearly in the West. Um, Now that can be really inflationary. It can be really reductionistic and can lead to silly models. So I'm not claiming that it's intrinsically more sophisticated than the forensic model, but what it holds out is it holds out something that, right? Um, it holds out that the point of the relationship to the sacred, um, I'll just say it in some of the standard language, is not salvation, but enlightenment, which is a very different model. It's a very different model, and it's something that has been eclipsed. So what does theosis mean? A lot it goes into this, so I'm trying to be as succinct as possible. And if some of you know more about it than I do, forgive me. I am still wrestling with this in a profound way. So it picks up from the pagan Neoplatonic idea of henosis, which is a profound sense of oneness, where of non-duality, of a breakdown of the subject object, upper, lower, inner, outer, all the dichotomies that divide us, all the dichotomies, fact, value, is, ought, all the dichotomies that are the grammar of the West are overcome in that state of henosis. But unlike the sort of Greek pagan notion of henosis, there's also a notion of kenosis that comes from what I just said about God becoming man. This is the notion of emptying. And this should sound very Buddhist. This is the notion of God as somehow self-emptying, which is a very different notion. God self-empties to make a space that impregnates us so that we can move towards more profound participation in the sacred and in the divine. And what that means for us is not an otherworldly seeing of strange things, but it's adverbial. I read an astonishing book, a masterpiece, while I was on the pilgrimage, called Renewing the Senses, The Philosophy of a Spiritual Life by Wynn, Wynn, Renewing the Senses. And what actually happens is you get this profound recovery of richness. So the Theoria, the contemplation, now isn't just abstract or visualization. It's in how you're seeing and feeling and experiencing everything. Everything is alive in a profoundly new and enriched way. You're deeply connected, deeply religio. Um, and what that means, that's the theophany. Everything is, you get the sense of the ultimacy of reality and the primordial aspects of reality coming together in everything, in the act of participating in how it is present to you. Um, um, and what that means is we move between the two ways we understand our agency. One is autonomy, the thing most beloved by the European Enlightenment and Kant. Autonomy, 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 autonomy. I'm self-governing. I must be autonomous in relationships. Don't get dysfunctional. Don't lose your autonomy. Autonomy, 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 autonomy. Of course, autonomy is an engine of fragmentation. Um, And then what we have done is we would then just completely abandon autonomy into heteronomy, and we give ourselves over in fascism or communism to some great collectivity. That's heteronomy. Uh, the idea in theosis is it's neither one of those. It's theonomy, where you're just naturally oriented and tempted to what is most deeply, really relevant and real to you, so that you are not making it happen, but it is not being imposed on you. And this is the key thing here. This is one of the things that really resonated for me. So think about a really compelling argument. Just go with me for a minute. This, like, what are you doing? Just go with me. Bear with me. A really compelling, it's compelling, but it's not compulsive. It has what Frankfurt calls voluntary necessity. You say, yes, the conclusion follows, but you also feel like you're agreeing with it. You're choosing it. Think about love. Love is a voluntary necessity. It is when I cannot do other than love Sarah, but I don't feel like I'm losing my agency. I feel like I'm fully expressing it. When I'm transfixed by beauty, that is that sense of voluntary necessity. These are all forms of theonomy. Voluntary necessity in reason, in love, in beauty, in the flow state. Bishop Maximus gave a lecture on Clement about this very powerful analysis of what faith meant. And it didn't mean believing when there's no evidence. When he was done, I gave him this argument about voluntary necessity. And it hits and it like a penny drop for me. I said, you mean by faith what I mean by that theonomous sense, that sophrison, right? Of voluntary necessity. And he said, after I made the argument, I kid you not, this is a bishop. I don't know what to make of this. He said, John, that's a perfect argument. You're absolutely right. That's theosis. That's theosis until you move through stages where so I had an experience where I had moments where that ego fever that fills your awareness at levels you're not aware of suddenly drops away. And there's the potential for profound absolute nihilism in that moment, as William Desmond says. But instead, something else shines through. And you get this profound participation beyond your anticipation. And so you start living and seeing and being. And it's not that you see God. You start to, and this sounds wrong, and it is wrong if you try and put any definitive meaning on it, but you start to see as God would see. That sounds arrogant. but I'm trying to describe it to you. And I'm not I just have little tiny glimpses, and I saw it. And I would ask the people like Jonathan and Bishop, like who are living it, what's that like? What's that like? Come on, what's it like? Again, what's it like? So theosis is a way in which, not in just ideas, not in representations, not even, and wow, who would have thought John Vervaeke would have said, not even just in practices. Practices are there. That's the theurgia. You have to do all kinds of rituals that enhance your receptivity. But this is a sense of the sacred that's beyond all of that. Um, and I saw it in to varying degrees in all of my interlocutors. I saw it profoundly in Bishop Maximus. I was touched by um, his presence. I don't know how else to put it. In ways, and he was already a good friend. Um, I don't know. Some of this may sound hooky, but I'm trying to answer your question as honestly as possible. Theosis has become what William James would call a viable option for me. Not that I'm gonna, not that I'm probably gonna realize it, but I glimpse it the way I've glimpsed moksha, satori, kensho, henosis in my practices and in my reflections.
Yeah, I mean, this is profound, John, and I think it goes kind of to the heart of something that I wrestle with a lot or think about a lot, and that I think also goes to the heart of any question around trying to navigate reality today or at any point, which is around agency. You know, you mentioned the word
Yeah.
agency and this sense of, I suppose, the Enlightenment worldview and certainly the cultural story we're in now is that, and you have, you know, this is in Leviathan, in fact, this sense that we can grasp the world and bend it to our will as individuals, right? Compared to, say, um, you know, maybe on the other end of the spectrum, the idea that everything is predestined, and in fact, my will doesn't really matter at all. So I'm kind of in a flow. What you're describing sounds like a synthesis. I mean, yeah, a synthesis. I wouldn't say synthesis. I think it's oversimplifying it, but there's a combination of I have my agency, and yet I am voluntarily, and I'm in a flow of reality that is beyond me, and I'm still voluntarily acting. And there's a kind of there's a, well, I've heard people refer to this as transcendent free will. It's free will within determinism, right? So, and, you know, I have these, you know, for me, it's very potent because I've always had these experiences since I was a child of knowing I was going to be a writer, and that's my thing, and which is kind of this kind of feeling of destiny and sort of, yeah, voluntary necessity in a sense, and you know, a deep desire, but also a deep kind of certainty that that's what you know I'm going to do. I was just pulling out of my bag. Because I was just in Germany. It's just I was pulling out my first book, Super Raccoon, from when I was 6 years old, because I was in Germany clearing out a storage unit. And it was just really potent to me. I was coming up with all these little, you know, books that they let us print in school and thinking, wow, like there's something, you know, probably for each of us, some sense of deeper connectedness that we have to the world of why we're here. Now, it seems to me that as a culture, we've removed any sense that there's a, you know, a teleology, a directedness to the culture. It can't be directed, you know. It's just kind of a random unfolding of chaos, you know, in its extreme form. And I wonder about your thoughts on that, as you know, how that actually contributes to the state we're in and to the chaos that we're, you know, experiencing on, certainly on the cultural level, but you know, I would say also on the political level.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent question, and I think what I described as theophany, what we've seen is a culture that has idolized autonomy. Um, Now we are now in the grip of heteronomy. We are in the grip of forces beyond our control that are taking away from us our personhood, our selfhood, and robbing us in a very insidious manner of most of our agency. So as we glorified autonomy, we have become progressively more and more prey to heteronomy, which means, of course, we vacillate between narcissism and nihilism on an ongoing basis. And so I think the degree to which um, we have committed ourselves to that dichotomy has made us the victim of it. in a very, very profound way. And I think getting out of it, this is what I'm coming to realize, although everything I say has to be said with a great deal of caution, because I'm very unclear about a lot right now. But I'm doing a course called Seeing God Again for the first time, and taking apart these dichotomies, deconstructing them, but not just giving in to the empty place that deconstruction leaves you in, is a very, very challenging task. It is not just a task of ideas. It is a task of reconfiguring your sensibility, your agency, your selfhood, and your personhood in very fundamental ways. We're going to need uh, like very, very sophisticated, complex dynamics, ecologies of practices, and commitment from people. Um, it's it's very it's very interesting to see the countercurrent to that, which is also what I was seeing. I've been seeing it before I went on the philosophical Silk Road, but it became more apparent to me. This coalescence, people that are. So I'm going to have a conversation with Michael Levin, the biologist, and Jonathan Pajot, the Eastern Orthodox icon carver. And they both want to have that conversation with John Vervaeke, the Canadian cognitive scientist. Do you think these three groups of people would have talked to each other 10 years ago? And yet now, not only like with not even on the radar, it now seems like, yeah, that's really appropriate. We should be doing that. And that's just one example of all of this. And there's an increasing sense that we've got to get into a new space because, and this is what I talk about with the advent of the sacred, we have to make these connections because we're confronting new ontologies. We're confronting the virtual, the artificial, the cyber. And our legacy religions are not well developed to encounter those. We are encountering a world that is rapidly complexifying, and evolvability is central rather than stability. So what that might change your notion of the sacred. Your notion of the sacred might go from perfection and rest to evolvability. It might go towards a notion from one of the church fathers, Gregory of Nyssa, epictasis, which is God isn't the place of rest. God is the eternal affordance of our self-transcendence, which is a very different notion. And so I do see that in our idolatry of autonomy, we have fallen prey to the demons of heteronomy, the demons of totalitarianisms of many different kinds and forms. To break out of that, we have to reconfigure what we consider ultimately real and ultimately orienting. And people are doing that. They're making connections, and they're trying to take the sense of the sacred into domains that it has not spoken to before.
Yeah, and that for me feels very exciting. Actually, there's a sense of renewal and a sense of possibility when I think of that. Because I've written about this a fair amount, talked about it a lot. Like I think our best hope is our best hope for collective coherence and some level, not of homogeneity, but of at least a shared baseline is the sacred, and is some orientation to the sacred.
Well, I think that's the other proper thing, and that was part of the philosophical Silk Road, which is a final encounter, uh, a proper pluralism, not a relativism, which I think is a self-defeating position, but a proper pluralism. Our attitudes, our previous attitudes, our first attitude was conquer it, destroy it, an imperialist attitude. The next was an infantilize it. Your sacredness is an earlier version of mine, and I have a condescending, patronizing attitude of growing you up into my sacredness. Those are no longer available to us, I think, in any kind of moral or epistemologically justifiable fashion. And what was interesting is that all what was taking shape for me And I was presenting it to all the interlocutors, and they agreed with that we have to find a through line. We have to find dialogos between all the religious homes, because if we don't hang together, we're going to fall apart. If we cannot recover a shared sense of sacredness at a global level, we won't be able to tackle the global level issues. We will instead give ourselves over either to tribalism or globalism, which are both very problematic
Yeah.
ideas. And so a metaphor that came out, or an analogy, was the idea that I took it from attachment theory. People need to develop a secure attachment to their home religion. I use the metaphor of your monogamous erotic relationship. Um,
Mm.
for example, I have it to Sarah, and contrary to all the bullshit we were given about, dysfunctional codependency and all that, the research shows actually people who are dependent on each other in secure attachment are actually capable of much more um, fecund and profound exploration of their world than the
Yeah.
person who tries to remain autonomous within a relationship. And so the idea is, could everybody find, their monogamous erotic relationship in a way that actually affords them to deeply love, deep philia, other traditions, not love, like not the Christian loving the Buddhist. You should do that if you're a Christian, but the Christian loving Buddhism, learning from Buddhism, learning that Buddhism perhaps can teach the Christian about mindfulness. The Buddhist learning that perhaps from Christianity, you could learn about the integration of agape and logos, that actually none of us can grip the whole hyper network of the virtues, that they are dynamic and constantly reconstellating. And we could learn deeply from each other and thereby come to mutual transformation that could bind us together in love without us being homogenized or coming into some, global agreement or some really dangerous idea like that. And that vision was actually not given to me by me. It was, it wasn't articulated like that, but it was articulated in the philosophical Silk Road, but it was originally given to me by Bishop Maximus. He took me aside when I was in Etna in the monastery. He said, John, stop talking about the religion that's not a religion. You're getting it wrong. He said, do this philosophical Silk Road you're talking about. I love that. That's great. Because if we try to manufacture the sacred, which is what I was trying to do with the religion that's not a religion, we're in a performative contradiction. It's like manufacturing friendship. I'm going to make you my friend. That's insane. That's insane. Um, and so I think I mean, there's overwhelming research that we're capable of we perspectives that get us out. I mean, this is experimental work, by the way, rigorous experimental work that we can take we perspectives that get us out of game theoretic, spiraling downward dynamics and allow us to get to something that's mutually better than either one of us can achieve on our own. We can do the opposite of the tragedy of the commons. We can have, right, the magnificence of the commons. And that's, again, that is not pie in the sky. That's really possible and really available to us.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I was just thinking of the Rumi quote of or lots of Rumi quotes around burning, around the idea that sacred essence is present, and it's just about burning away what's in the way of it, rather than having to manufacture or find it. That's always resonated with me a lot. Wonderful. So we're going to go into breakouts, everyone. And your breakout question is, well, actually, I'll tell you the question in a moment. Again, this isn't the same as having a chat or a conversation. This is an inquiry, and so it's really a process of being curious about what's coming up as you're speaking it, staying connected to your body and your breath, and seeing where the question leads you. And the question is, what is sacred to me? What is sacred to me? And so we'll have about 4 minutes each. And the person today with the most colorful background is going to start. And then the rest, you can nominate the next person to go. So the rooms are open. And Ria, I don't know which account you're in, but let me know if you're.
Yeah.
After doing this for years and years, I have an uncanny ability to look at gallery view and see who's secretly harboring a question but hasn't got the courage to raise it. Like Joshua, yes, I caught you.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the exploration into all these concepts. I feel like the words are pointing towards really helpful ways of thinking. So thanks for showing up. And yeah, I guess I'm curious about the uncertainty and the confusion and what's stirring for you, John, as in this time as you seem to be landing from this big experience. What's moving below the surface?
Yeah, that is the correct question, because there's much more moving before the surface than I'm able to put into words. And the thing of it is, you know, I'm gonna I'm still have two more legs. The next leg is probably going to be next May. I'm going to go to Samarkand in India, and then sometime later, I'm going to Kyoto. So part of me, sorry, Joshua, I am answering your question. Part of me doesn't want to try and fully resolve until I've gone through the whole thing. So I'm trying to stay. I'm trying to I'm trying to resist the scientist in me who wants to bring everything into a systematic closure and completeness kind of thing. What's stirring in me is after having some very, I mean, so I had realized, because of a couple of very powerful experiences I realized that I had been keeping a duality behind all the other in all my attempts to overcome dualities and pursue non-duality. I had pursued a duality and an identification in which I had argued that non-duality and non-theism mean that you identify God in impersonal terms, in impersonal ways. And Wynn's book and some powerful experiences made me realize, well, sometimes there's like the Spinoza talks about the face of the cosmos. He never explains what he means by it. But like in a face, the whole is signified in each part. Rather than building up out of the part, the whole is signified and lives, for example, in the eyes. The eyes are the gateway to the soul. Sometimes reality does this, and you're facing reality rather than just looking at it or measuring it. It's facing you, and it has this personal dimension, and it's calling forth from you voluntary necessity, which is what we experience in the personal realms of reason and love and beauty. And ontonormativity means it's intrinsically valuable, like how we're supposed to relate to a person. And then I realized there's ways in which I was inflicting and truncating my ability to participate in the sacred by my refusal to acknowledge that the personal is just as real as the impersonal. And that, just like Spinoza says, you have to look through God and nature to add ultimate reality. You have to look through the personal and the impersonal to make yourself most deeply resonant with the sacred. And so that is really shuffling my identity around, because one of the ways in which I had sort of preserved a psychological barrier between me and perhaps my Christian background was, well, I'm a non-theist, you understand, and I don't go in for any of these personal ways of naming God. That's really hard to do if you study pseudo-Dionysus deeply in the names of God. And I've come to realize, and this isn't going to be surprising if you're familiar with my work, but the proper relationship is a opponent processing between the personal and the impersonal. Um, and because that's what keeps alive that stereoscopic depth perception. But what that means then about my relationship to these religious frameworks in terms of my fundamental identity. Some of the bulwarks that I had in place, I didn't even realize, because I told myself I'm going to be balanced and open, and I was trying, that was sincere. But some of the bulwarks of, that I had put up for psychological reasons have come down, and that has left me very profoundly confused. All I know is I'm in service to whatever the pilgrimage is, and I'm in service to all of these great traditions right now. But I don't know. Sorry, this sounds like a silly teenager movie. I don't know who I am right now. And that I'm not experiencing that as like noxious, but it is confusing. And that's what you're picking up. That's what's stirring around in me right now. And what does it mean if I open myself up to a whole domain, keeping it in balance? I haven't rejected all the arguments I've made for non-theism or non-dualism, but what does it mean when I open myself up because of other good arguments on the other side? So Pyrrho, who was an ancient Greek philosopher, he's known as the Greek uh, Buddha because he traveled to India and he sort of created something within Greek philosophy very much like Zen. And he talked about isosthenia, a balance of arguments that puts you into epoche, right? Which is a kind of constructive aporia that allows you to see more deeply into reality. That's sort of where I am at. I hope that was helpful, Joshua.
I really appreciate your that exploration and just humility to stand in that uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, and I opened myself up, right? A lot of the people who are always a little bit like, well, John talks about the sacred and the weird, but at least he, and so that bulwark is gone too. So I don't know what that's going to mean, but
Mm.
voluntary necessity for me right now. So
Thank you.
thank you for that. That was a very pertinent question, Joshua.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joshua. That was kind of the perfect first question as well. And I'm just curious who has had that experience of that John's describing of not really knowing who you are or what makes sense anymore. I mean,
I
just
think
raise
I
your hand.
asked it because I'm there right now.
Yeah, me too. I'm sort
I
of in
thought I
that.
knew what I was doing 3 months ago, and now here I'm like, oh God,
Yeah.
starting again.
Yeah, I know that experience very well myself as well. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, John, for your honest sharing as well. Sarah,
So I guess it's going to be lots of thoughts right now because it's all coming together, but it's kind of building from that last point of Ali's. But it seems to be a tension from like needing to know that something is tangible, like needing something that's tangible, and then versus an acceptance that there's a deep sense of knowing that is just a deep sense, and you don't need anything that's tangible. And recently, I don't know if it was on this course, but somebody said something about that if we're seeking something, then we know that it exists because we're looking for it. So therefore, we already know. And so, say we're seeking God, we already know because we're seeking it that God exists. So then that's within us. So sometimes I feel that I'm looking outside all of the time for answers when the answers are within me. So that idea of like, actually, will you ever resolve it? And I'm a big fan of James Hollis. And in one of his recent works, he's talked about the fact that, it's mystery, like life is a mystery, and that actually our journey is accepting that mystery. So is that, I was just wondering your thoughts on that tension between seeking something, we're looking for something, we're exploring it, which I love to do, I love philosophy, but at the same time, that deep acceptance of mystery.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. First of all, I want to give credit where credit due. I don't know who said it on the course, but the person who first said it first and perhaps said it best was Plato. That is one of Plato's key arguments. It's one of the central claims in a dialogue called the Meno, but it also shows up in the Theotetus, it shows up in the Symposium. A version of the argument goes something like this. you're seeking virtue. Let's say it's the virtue of honesty. You don't completely know what it is. But if you were completely empty of honesty, I couldn't interest you in honesty, and nothing would guide you towards honesty. And so that's why we're, in Plato's terms, metaxu. We're always between. And of course, that goes a lot towards the work of William Desmond and the work I do on relevance realization. And I think that's profoundly right. I think we have to be very careful, and that requires, no pun intended here, that requires a tremendous amount of honesty on us, because we have to become really fine-grained connoisseurs of our relationship. So accepting mystery doesn't mean giving up acuity. It doesn't mean making everything blurry and confused. In fact, mystery demands exactly the opposite. It demands the most acute discernment we have. And of course, Sarah, you know, I'm not accusing you of this, I'm just responding. But a lot of times when people start making that move, well, I know it because I seek it, they're drifting into wish fulfillment language. And there's a lot of stuff we wish for that isn't real. A lot of pathologies have at the heart of, you know, people, I'm seeking the perfect romantic partner, and therefore the perfect romantic partner must be there, and the cosmos. And this is just endless bullshit that causes endless suffering in people's lives. So we have to be very careful around this. I think you're right. That's why I began by saying I'm in profound agreement with it, because in the end, I am a Neoplatonist. But you know, Plato said, once we understand that love is drawing us to something we do not know, but that we do know in some mixed way, we have to be very, very, very acute and very astute and very clear, because the mystery can be a place in which people build mystique, and they build and they build manipulation. So I'm only saying that because you know, this is something I'm wrestling with. I'm wrestling with, how do I know the difference between when I'm really resonating with something the way you're talking about it, from when I'm projecting onto reality in a way, one of the things that's been helpful is an exercise from William Desmond called Absolute Zero, which is to sit, do some preparatory practices, and then really try to take on the perspective and the identity of the nihilist. That everything you think is meaningful and beautiful and true is a projection. Let it go. Let it really, really, let it eat as deeply as possible. Don't do this if you're still working with trauma, by the way, right? And then what remains is exactly what you're talking about. What remains is what is not being generated by projection, but what is calling to you. And of course, you should always be challenging it and reflecting on it. Sorry, I'm going on about this because I think it's really, really crucial. It's really, really, the worst things come from the best things turn bad. And that knowing by loving and seeking, but being open to mystery, is so quickly and easily perverted in our culture. So I'm trying to be encouraging, that we have to bring discernment and astuteness to that. And I'm talking to myself as much as to anybody else, because you know, again,
I personally think when you've had experiences of like a really deep connection, particularly with other people, especially after like friction, or after you felt quite angry, and you actually managed to move past all of that ego, and you experience what I would describe as agape, and true grace, then that is when you experience that.
I think that's right. And I'm trusting, because the way you're presenting it, that you understand agape. Of course, here's an example. Our culture reduces love to an emotion and an emotions to feelings. And they think that agape is to have certain kinds of feelings. It is not to do that passage, that metanoetic passage beyond egocentrism. Iris Murdoch said it best: love is the painful recognition that something other than yourself is real. And that's that's for me, what you just said is exactly a concrete example of the kind of discernment I'm talking about. So thank you for that.
Wonderful, wonderful question, Sarah. Thank you, and thank you, John, for your answer. Could you remind us that absolute zero practice? What was the name of the person who came up with it?
So the best, it's based on the work of William Desmond. I just did a course on William Desmond called God in the Between. There's a book by Duns on spiritual exercises for a secular age based on the work of William Desmond, Duns, and he talks about. He takes Desmond's talking about absolute zero and he sort of turns it into a spiritual exercise in the sense of Pierre Hadot.
Brilliant. Guys, guess what you're doing for your pod inquiry this week? I think I'm very curious about that. I'll check that out and look into that. We might not, but I just think it sounded quite appealing. Wonderful. We've got a bit of time left. John, are you able to go 5 minutes over?
Of course.
Amazing. Okay,
These are wonderful. These are wonderful questions.
They are. That was my thoughts exactly. So Frederick and then Gibran.
All right. Thanks. So last week we were talking about with Joshua about myths, and like one thing also that came up during the breakouts was this, subtle difference between like a myth, like a story that is alive, and a myth like a lie. And it's sometimes so hard to see the difference between the two. And I remember listening to your Awakening from the Meaning Crisis videos, which I really, really liked, but was building up to this, great thing. And then the conclusion was a religion that is not a religion, because the conclusion almost had to be something religious. And then now, you just told us your pilgrimage and your openness to religion, and this journey sounds so familiar. Like are we trying to build, like, am I like trying to build my own myth making, my own story, my own model of the world, or should I just go out there and seek the religion, the things that are already there, but that I'm not open to because I'm too busy building my own world and my own systems. So can you maybe tell me a little bit, like maybe some advice about like choosing either of those two?
There's another fantastic question, one that sits on my heart. I'll start abstractly and then hopefully become more concrete. So what you're proposing is autonomy or heteronomy as the answer. I make it by myself or I go and receive it from somebody else. And the answer is that's not theonomy. That's not how the sacred shows up. You have to participate in it. You don't make it, you don't receive it. You have to participate in it. And it's like friendship. You can't just wait. You can't just make it happen. It's Zen enlightenment. You don't get enlightenment by seeking it, but only seekers will become enlightened. Zen likes to do that kind of thing on an ongoing basis. And so for me, and this is picking up on the discussion that I had with Sarah, I'm trying to pay attention to moments of voluntary necessity that are shareable in some fruitful way with other people. Because I think these are the two dimensions of meaning. And this is also, I'll be releasing a video essay, but also a paper for submission. I've engaged in a very deep critique of the standard psychological construct of meaning in life that I just used to always use unquestionably. There's a part of self-critique. See, meaning is a normative term. It's not just a descriptive term. A descriptive term is like blue. A normative term means you're praising it, or blaming it. When I say someone's life is meaningful, I'm not just describing it, I'm praising it. I'm recommending it. There's normativity there, which means there's also the possibility of error and self-deception. And meaning has to be shared. If I say to you, Google, frip, well, do you agree? If we don't share the meaning, this is an old point by Wittgenstein, there's no such thing as a private language. And you say, well, I have things that are just meaningful to myself. Probably not. You're probably talking in your head to other people and getting feedback in a semi-conscious fashion. And so I've been trying to find moments of voluntary necessity that are calling to me, that are nevertheless correcting me, and that I can find helpfully shareable with other people, which is what I'm trying to exemplify right now. And that's helping me. That's helping me neither make it nor merely receive it, but participate in its self-disclosure, if I can put it that way. I'm trying to engage in theonomy, so there's a theophany that calls to me. I tried to make it more concrete, but then maybe I just ended up in poetry. Was that helpful at all?
Yes, it was. It will take some time to decipher, but I think I understand what you're saying.
Look at the things that call you to faithfulness, and in a way in which challenges you to become more wise and more in community, common unity, not groupthink, not social contract, but as William Desmond talks about, common unity, community. Look for those things and then start working with others from that. That would be my recommendation. As long as you do that, along with all my older recommendations, like don't just do propositions, do an ecology of practices, rituals of receptivity, dialogical, imaginal, mindful, embodied. But in addition to that, yeah.
Thanks.
So, some of you know I have like a dialogical partner with my muse, Hermes, and he basically said to me, John, stop trying to make God. Stop it. Just stop it.
It can't be done, can it? Yeah. Wise advice. Beautiful. So last, but certainly not least, Gibran.
Thank you so much, John. What a privilege, what a blessing to be with you from this place that you're speaking from.
Thank you.
Deeply, deeply moving. The transmission is powerful, and the tenderness is just very enlivening and deepening. So thank you so much for the courage. What is coming up for me is so much of this mess is our resistance to life and its terms, right? Like the tragedy of the human condition is a big no, right, to the fact that we will die and we will get old and we'll get sick. And when I also grew up Christian, but I grew up in a fundamentalist Catholic context. So I had the crucifix, which is different from the cross. And I never learned this in the theology I grew up with. It might be there, but I didn't learn it. But in that contemplation of that crucifix, which I thought about a lot, like what would have been like for native folk to be exposed to this tortured man on a cross? Like, what sense does it make? And what it has come to mean to me is you can be God, or at least one of the goodest men to walk the earth. And it doesn't matter. You are subject to life and its terms. Torture, right? Betrayal, humiliation. And what you do before the terms is you open your arms, you forgive, and you love anyway. And there's something about that in this particular religion about the incarnational nature of that, and the symbolic visualization of that body on that cross that I think allows for a kind of, what's the word, a kind of theosis that is different from what can feel quite esoteric and contempt and like big. It's like, no, it's like in the flesh, in this reality, under these conditions, this is the posture. And it just feels like there's as I keep hearing you speak about where you are, it feels like there's something there that I just wanted to lift up and see.
I think that's deeply right. I'm sort of I'm not intimidated, but like extremely impressed by the perspicaciousness of the questions that are being asked here, and I'm very grateful for that. This is part of the idea that as in the incarnation, Jesus emptying himself in his humanity does not in any way mean he lost his divinity. In a similar way, our theosis in no way means we leave our humanity behind. And that those are exactly held in parallel by some of the Cappadocian church fathers. And what was interesting for me is I was reading a book, really astonishing novel on the philosophy. So much was given to me. So much was given to me. I was reading Orbital by Samantha Harvey, and it's this astonishingly lyrical, beautiful book about people in orbit around the Earth. It sounds boring, right? But the thing is, she's playing with when the human beings, they're in this super finite, vulnerable, mortality is literally inches away, kind of, and they're intermeshed, and it's like the finitude, but they're also overview effect, looking into the transcendent moment by moment, and they're constantly and her prose is weaving between those. But to me, that's also, I read by Capobianco, who's a Heideggerian. He was going through the I purchased a reproduction, a crucifixion, and he says this is the epitome of finite transcendence, that the finite and the transcendence are being held together like in orbital. And when we hold that tonos, right, so and we become godlike without ever inflating or trying to bypass or leave in some sort of crypto luxury Gnosticism our embodiment behind, right? Then we actually realize the depth of our humanity. And when I saw that clicked with Drew Hyland's work, that Plato's whole philosophy is about getting us to use Socrates to realize and identify with our finite transcendence. If we hold just our finitude, we become slaves. If we hold just our transcendence, we become tyrants. But if we hold them together, we become persons in community. And so all of that has come more clearly together for me. And that is part of what I was trying to convey in the notion of theosis. Like, just as the emptying of God does not mean that Jesus loses his divinity, and again, I don't know what I mean by these words completely, but what they meant is, in a similar way, our becoming godlike does not ever sever us from our humanity. Those two are absolutely interpenetrating and symmetrical with each other. And I think properly understanding that offers an alternative to the sort of inflationary proposals that are being given to us by transhumanism and accelerationism and all kinds of other pseudo enlightenments.
Wow. Thank you, Brandon, for that beautiful, really insightful question, and John for that answer as well. That's I just watched Peter Thiel's conversation on transhumanism, and I'm writing a book about AI and religion, and so I could talk for a long time about how I feel about that. I think that's incredibly important right now. I mean, finite transcendence, like, that's an incredibly powerful notion. It seems to me, just wrapping up, there's a kind of synthesis. Synthesis feels like too, I don't know, weak a word for
It's too Hegelian.
Yeah, it's too Hegelian, right? But there's something of a coming together and a transcending and including, to use Wilbur's term, that's been a theme in this whole conversation, that I think is also is what I feel is most important right now culturally, because if we don't move towards that new territory, then like, as you pointed, John, we have this pendulum swing between the autonomy and the heteronomy, which I think is also a key framing, and I think we all see that happening, but I think actually even naming it as that is a very important thing right now, because I think most certainly you don't see that on the nightly news. You don't see people talking about that swing in the nightly news. All they're doing is reporting on the symptoms of it and struggling to make sense of it. And I think what we're trying to do here is go to that deeper level. And I think you've really helped us to do that. So, and also just thank you for really touching honesty and openness. You know, we've done a lot of conversations over the years, and they're all wonderful in their own way. But I really feel very touched and like it's a privilege to be having this conversation with you right now. So thank you.
Well, thank you, all of you. Ali, I guess this is my first public conversation about the philosophical Silk Road. It's still very raw in me, but a lot of you were very, very helpful. Many of you know I think that things can only come out in dialogos and that cannot ever come out in monologue. And so I greatly appreciate it. Again, take everything I say with, like this, because everything's in flux for me. I'm glad that you're finding some of my insights helpful. I would then point back through me to the fact that the Abrahamic West's wisdom traditions, especially the Neoplatonic thread that runs through them, this is what I'm drawing on. The West has rich resources that we have lost connection to. I'm coming to think that we can't really understand moksha or kensho or satori unless we can revivify theosis within our Western way of being. That is the only thing that will give us the deep way to understand what comes from the Indian or the Chinese and Japanese worlds.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's again what you call the advent of the sacred, right? This communication between the different traditions. It feels
Very
like
much.
that for me feels like a very beautiful future if that can start to happen, which I think the possibility is there. So thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful questions and your presence. Let's do our traditional unmuting, and a thank you to John and a goodbye.
Gracias.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.